guest for this seminar. He is Jörn Jansen. He's from Germany, and he has worked as architect, but he has PhD in political sciences, and then he became professor without us knowing it in Dortmund and University of Westminster. We recently found out that he has a lot to tell us, and he is going to speak to us about unions, pioneering for socialist ideals in Germany after and before German Revolution in 1918. It is yours.
Yeah, I should say to begin with that my relationship with Turkey is based on my time in Dortmund, when many Turks came to work in the mining industry and in the construction industry. And at one point I did a study about immigration in the construction industry, and that was end of the 60s, when Turks were actually 30% of the wage earning employees in the construction industry. 30%. Not salaried staff, but wage earning. So we were very close to Turks. We lived in an area which was dominantly Turkish. We had a cafe down in our house, Turkish cafe. So it's nice to have this kind of meeting. But I notice this is not a subject which is regarded as particularly interesting. But I must say I study history not for the purpose of knowing history, but for the purpose of understanding the present. And I think we should discuss everything I'm talking about as a means to understand the process of transformation in which we are living. And I wanted to say also that I see the labor process, mental and physical labor, the labor process as the essential agent of social development. It is in the labor process that, or through the labor process, that change takes place in society, in the human society. And in this context, the two subjects which I'm addressing basically. The lockout in the construction industry, which is a typical labor dispute, very advanced at that time, and the building guild movement, Bauhüttenbewegung, which actually is incorporated in what's called the Association of Social Construction Companies, or Verband Sozialer Baubetriebe. I will call it VSB to make it simpler. VSB is this construction company which was set up by the construction workers after the Second World War. And I think both events are interesting to be interpreted in hindsight from nowadays. I start with saying something about the capital-labor relations in the construction industry between 1819 and 1914. There was a long economic crisis in the whole of Europe up to about 1889, 1890. But then it was a booming period, especially in Germany. Germany was really advancing rapidly. And the German construction industry peaked with an average annual creation of 4 joint stock companies per year between 1906 and 1910 is compared to an annual average of no more than 1.4 between 1891 and 1900. You can see the joint stock companies were created faster and faster, more and more. And these were the famous German construction joint stock companies. I put them down because you may know some of them. They're not all in existence anymore, but they were all in existence. They were the big companies still after the Second World War. And with the rising power, well, I wanted to say something before this development of joint stock companies and accumulation and concentration of industrial capital was instrumental in the formation of large corporations, but not merely as a quantitative process, but as a qualitative process. Means changing social relations of production, social labor relations. And its clearest expression was, of course, the rise of the Aktiengesellschaft joint stock company as a form of divided ownership. And Hilferding put it into very definite terms. I'm sorry. Can you read it yourself? The development of joint stock holding separates executive leadership from property and makes executive function a special function of higher paid wage earners and employees. It was written in 1910. And this separation was a concentration process of property independent from the concentration process in the industry, which nevertheless took place at the same time. But I must say, when I read this, and it's not so long ago, I was surprised that this was already perceived in this way in those days. The First World War, that basically in the company the owner had no say anymore directly, only indirectly. This transformation of capital had been driven by the rise of the statutory regulation of labor relations. And Hugo Zinsheimer, I come back to Hugo Zinsheimer later. He wrote a book called The Cooperative Labor Standard Contract, a Private Law Investigation. Zinsheimer was a lawyer and became a member of parliament. Was the most progressive labor historian. Well, not historian. He advocated the state regulation of labor. And with the rising power of capital, from 1890, as I said, the membership of the German Social Democratic Party. No, what is this? The rising power of the Social Democratic Party exploded to almost 1 million in 1912. Social Democrats were 1 million members in 1912. While its representation in the Reichstag, you know what Reichstag is? The parliament, yeah. The parliament already is called Reichstag because it was still under the emperor initially. And it expanded the representation in Reichstag from 19% in 1890 to 34.8% in 1912. Can you read the figures? Yes, please. Well, I printed it out because I thought it's easier and perhaps penetrates the memory in a particular way.
What's the total number of Reichstag members? How many members of the Reichstag were there? Altogether.
The Reichstag.
I come back to it. I can't tell.
300 something?
I don't know the size of Reichstag. Maybe 200. Then it is twice as many. It must be in that range. I don't know. I'm not a specialist in this area. I just studied this because I was interested in what happened in the construction industry. I read quite a bit, but this is a question which I can't answer. Anyway, inspired by the politics of the Social Democratic Party, the development of strike action in the German construction industry epitomizes the surge of labor union power in the decade before 1910. In the process of amalgamation and concentration, labor unions, can you mention amalgamation and concentration means regional as well as between the different trades. The labor unions built up their membership and became increasingly involved in class struggle, as reflected in strikes and lockouts. Do you know what lockouts are?
Yes. Well, employers
employers close the factory. Don't pay. And the main subjects of the lockout in 1910 were wage rates, working time, abolition of piece rates, employment agency. There was kind of employment agencies who controlled workers, and the rights of trade unions. And the German construction industry was the exemplary sector, exhibiting the power of labour after the lockout through an explosive rise in union membership. The union membership rose from 214,848 in 1910 to 344,725. Anyway, a plus of 50% between 1910 and 1912. It was an immensely rapid rise of membership in the union. The collectivization of labour in union organisation and the development of central collective agreements on wages and conditions proceeded in step with the industrial concentration and anonymity of capital as the most dynamic form of property. Most significant was, however, the historical transformation of the relationship between labour organisation and employers' federations. As summarized by Wilferding again, I read it out, I haven't put it down. As is well known, the fight about labour contract proceeds in 3 stages. The first stage, the individual manufacturer faces the individual worker. In the second, the individual manufacturer fights against the organisation of workers. And the third, the employers' organisations are united in confronting the workers' organisation. And that was the stage in which he wrote this down. And it was, at least in the construction industry, it was even at national level, the confrontation of collective organisation of employers and employees. This was written by Hilferding in 1910. And it was not until 8 years after the National Verband der Bauarbeitsleute und Berufsgenossenschaften, something, there was an initial organisation which got a different name later. had been founded in 1891. That was the beginning of the construction labor movement, really, of the great organization. And the Deutsche Arbeitgeberbund für das Baugewerbe, the German Employers Federation for the construction industry, was founded about 10 years later in Berlin in order to defend its interests against the construction workers. And that was already I had a quote. Yeah, it's gone. Something I was missing. Yeah, it's this one which I wanted to show you. This is from the minutes of the first session of the employers' organization of the construction industry. Before we have been victorious in a great trial of strength, we shall not achieve rest and peace. Such a trial of strength has to be carried out. We have to come to a point where we can lock out the workers in large enterprises, if not in the whole of Germany, in order to put an end to the unjustified demands. That was the founding Congress, and that was the purpose of the association of the employers in the construction industry. I wanted to show you also the development of this is development of the. We don't need to go into more details about the Employers Association, how they were growing. You can see here. Don't see that. Anyway, you can see the figures. They rose rapidly up to the lockout. And the growth in the membership of construction employers is of course the basis of this lookout we are going to talk about. This is, I'll make it short, this is just something which is also interesting. The construction industry, you can see in the middle, has 30.6% of workers' organization, of workers under collective agreement, just after the polygraphic trades. I mean, historically, the printers were always the first trade union organization, but the construction workers have now actually overtaken it. You can see, for instance, the clothing industry is 17%, and textile industry 1.6%, and metal work 9.7%. The construction industry was by far the most powerful and the greatest. Yeah, at least it was a great surprise for me, because construction industry is not usually known as a leading labor organization, but it was in this period, definitely. Yeah, in the construction, I'll show you the most important. It's too small for you to read.
That's fine.
It's readable. Anyway, these are the main unions: the bricklayers, the carpenters, and the laborers, and the plasterers, and tilers, and roofers, and so on. So much smaller. only the most important ones. And you can see how the membership was rising, especially on the bottom, on the right-hand side. After the strike, again rising by from 240,000 to 340,000. Yeah, so the major aim of the construction workers' unions was the establishment of collective agreements. And as we see, they were successful. This development was part of a united movement based on the common program for the Socialist Party and the labor unions. I quote what the Social Democratic Party, also from the minutes of their great congress in 1891. The main purpose of the party was the protection of the working classes, and was under these auspices that the development of union organization in the construction industry became so powerful. So this combined staggering increase in union and social democratic party organization associated with the rapid rise of real wages. I haven't got the figures left behind. Was exceptional anyway, as compared to that in Britain. It was only in Scandinavia that wages rose a bit faster. But in Germany was much faster than Britain. Britain was virtually stagnant at that period. And this rise of wages coincided, of course, with the development of productivity. You probably all know that Germany between 1890 and 19 and the First World War was rising rapidly in productivity and exploitation. So this development, of course, explains also the reaction of the employers. We are now talking about the great lockout. Yeah. Forget about this. Wanted to say a few things before. The lockout of 1910 was on the agenda of the, as you know, of the Employers' Federation. And given the dispersed organization of its diverse membership, this project took a while. It was decided to have a great national lockout in 1899. It was carried out in 1910. This was, of course, because of the very dispersed organization of the membership, and the project took some time to be put in practice. It was at General Assembly in 1907 in Cologne that they took a decisive step to prepare for a national confrontation to defeat the labor unions, once and for all in their campaigns for the improvement of pay and working conditions. The employers decided that reductions in working time had to be rejected, and no agreements were to be concluded before 31st of May 1908 in order to be able to lock out the workers across the whole country. So that was decided in 1907. And the model contract of the employers contained the following conditions. I must read them all out. That is really to be kept in mind what the point was. All collective agreements are to be concluded as a united whole. The contractually fixed hourly rate is to be paid only to qualified, skilled and proficient workers, that is, according to different wages. The level of achievement is to be decided by local organization. Also, workers are to reject higher wages of unorganized employers. Third, labor unions are prohibited from opposing payment by results and from exerting their influence on wages of employers outside the organization. Fourth, force the labor unions to recognize employers' non-paritarian reference letters for employment. If workers lost their job, they had to get a reference letter, and if they applied somewhere, they had to show the reference letter of the last employer. So this has to be recognized. Cancel existing collective agreements for civil engineering and leave its wages to the arbitrariness of the individual employer. So for civil engineering, it should remain a matter of individual companies. Force the labor unions to renounce a reduction in working time of less than 10 hours for the whole country and at all times, winter and summer. Any agitation on the building site is banned. Eighth, the chairman of the Court of Arbitration to be set up is to be appointed by the director of the Technical University of Charlottenburg. So the employers appointed their arbitration. And the contract is valid for 5 years. So that was their plan for framework agreement for the construction industry. The draft collective agreement based on these conditions became public and a matter of negotiations with arbitrators for a renewal of the existing national framework agreement. And this was on 25th, 26th March in Berlin. And the arbitral award, the result of the arbitration, was turned down by the bricklayers. And another meeting was then set up for the 27th of April to negotiate a new contract pattern. And this time, the award of a contract pattern allowing for overtime work only under very restricted conditions was accepted by both the employers' federations and the Central Union of the construction industry, and was to be binding for all local agreements till 31st of May 1910. So that was a kind of agreement in the time of peace till 31st of May 1910. Compromise. And as the existing national framework agreement for the construction industry was due to expire on the 1st of April 1910, negotiations on changes and amendments to this agreement began on 11th of November in 1909, so some 5-6 months before. From the start, the employers were not completely united. Berlin fiercely opposed the lockout. In addition to Berlin, the regional organizations of Hamburg and Bremen also did not take part in the lockout. Berlin signed an independent 3-year collective agreement for Pfennig. Hamburg maintained the still existing collective agreement, and Bremen did not give way to the pressure of the Federation. And individual companies such as, for instance, the giant internationally active Philip Holzmann declined to join in. That is important to keep in mind that large companies were not in favor of this lockout, actually. The joint stock company. The public response to this extraordinary, fierce industrial dispute was described in the book on 125 years construction union. It is the one which I gave you. That's what I haven't put it on. It comes later. Let's wait. Anyway, I have a quote from that book. Given this all-out confrontation for the first time, public opinion in the empire tilted in favor of the locked-out construction workers. The press criticized the disproportionate, brutal course of action of the employers. So it was negatively accompanied by the negative assessment of the public press. And public collections by professors, intellectuals and artists took place for the support of the construction workers assaulted in their existence. So it had a public, the locked out workers had public support, general public support. But most of the financial aid was raised by the labor unions, of course. Workers who were not locked out, whilst union employees, yeah, workers who were not locked out collected money, whilst union employees waived half their salaries for the relief of their colleagues. And the delay the time for support of unemployed workers was a bit prolonged because it was so expensive, so immensely expensive. I won't go into those details. Anyway, the number of locked-out workers varies slightly. Don't need to go into these details either. The lowest figure which I found was 130,000, and the highest was 197,000 by 25th of May. It varied, of course, by the course of the whole time. The lockout lasted 6 weeks. But I'll come back to that. Over the whole time of the lockout, the resistance of the construction workers intensified and came to a head by the middle of May. And the Home Office of the Imperial Government eventually took initiative to invite both parties to the dispute to a meeting on 21st of May. You remember, it started on the 10th of March. This meeting failed. The Home Office invited the parties to negotiations again for the Reichstag on the 27th of May. The large construction companies were also pressing for negotiations. And as a result, on 31st of May, proposals for compromise were eventually achieved. This is what I have now on the PowerPoint. These are the points which were achieved in 1908. Many were already in the framework of 1908 and were maintained, and a few were added to it. You see, central organization to be accepted by industrial partners, 10 hours minimum working time, no wage differentials according to proficiency, wages to be raised variably according to region by on average about 10%, not more, and generally binding for all employers, agitation of workers' unions on construction sites to be allowed. 3 points, though, had to be accepted by the union. Employers' reference letters remained uncontrolled. These letters which workers have to show if they apply for a job from the previous employer. Worker sympathy campaigning forbidden. Sympathy strikes. Piecework by individual agreement remained permitted. On this basis, after 3 days of negotiations, from 14th to 16th of June, a national collective agreement binding till April 1913 was finally accepted by the Employers' Federation. The lockout was called off from 18th of June and work was resumed. That was 18th of June was a Saturday. And work was resumed on Monday, the 20th of June 1910. So the chair of the Carpenters' Union assessed the result. We have achieved just about everything we wanted, but the employers have been clearly outplayed. And more enthusiastically, bricklayers and Central Union celebrated their success. Yes, we can assert with pride that this is the first great economic struggle which was won for us. Thus, the German Construction Workers' Union have shown that they have become a power which also the entrepreneurship has to reckon with. So the concessions to the employers concerning reference letters and so on, sympathy campaigning and piecework, were obviously regarded as minor concessions. On the whole, the framework agreement was a great success for the union. And what's more important than these results are, however, the wider consequences. This is something we must not forget. On the union side, the dispute triggered a process of unification between the 5 construction unions: the bricklayers, construction laborers, insulators, floor layers, and plasterers. And the first to join the Central Union of German Bricklayers and form the new German Construction Workers Union. That was a new name, German Construction Workers Union, Deutscher Bauarbeiterverband, were the construction laborers on 1st of January. They were the first to join, and the others followed later. Only the carpenters stuck with their craft in a separate union. Well, I won't talk more about that. When I worked in the construction industry after the Second World War, the carpenters came to a particular dress, and they were always regarded themselves as the more noble sort of workers. In contrast, the Employers' Federation for the construction industry became more divided, as demonstrated already by the non-participation in the lockout, and in particular through the resignation of Berlin from the Central Federation after the arbitration. National wage coordination and wage increases benefited the competitive position of the large and more capital-intensive, typically joint stock companies. So, though it was a defeat of the employers, the large employers had a benefit over the smaller employers. And then, of course, the large employers became leading in the Employers' Federation. So now we look at a few words to the most important impact, and to generalize it now with regard to what I said at the beginning, what this meant in a more long-term historical context. The most important impact of the employers' defeat in the 8-week lockout was that the new national agreement on wages and working conditions, Tarifvertrag in German, heralded a more anonymous form of wage relations, in contemporary terms, the standardization of the labor contract, replacing its authoritative determination by employers. This is what Zinsheimer wrote in 1907, before this lockout. He regarded that as the modern form of labor relations which should be achieved under legal regulation. Under the regime of industrial collective agreements, the wage ceased to represent the price for the use of individual labor power paid by an individual employer as a minimum rate to maintain levels in the reproduction of labor, and turned, this is the main point, into a share of the social product, differentiated between workers according to the level of qualification, negotiated between labour and capital, at national level of specific industrial sectors. So that's a sectoral agreement, sectoral the system of sectoral national agreements and bargaining. And in these negotiations, the increase in productivity became the determinant measure for raising wage rates at short intervals. However, the shares attributed to labour on the one hand and to property on the other remained dependent on the power relationship, equal or unequal, between the collective parties. But nevertheless, the decisive point which played a central role in wage negotiations, still nowadays often, is the development of productivity. So the wages should normally rise with productivity because it's the work of labour which is instrumental in rising productivity and raising productivity. And this form of the employment contract and the labour capital agreement was to become a matter of social economic policy under the supervision of national civil government and jurisdiction, which had a variety of implications at social, economic and political levels, as anticipated again by Hugo Zinsheimer already in 1908. The transformation of the labour contract from a one-sided relation of dependency into a legal relationship under mandatory norm. This was before the First World War, I remind you. The dispute 1910 could also be identified as a stage in the development of labour relations leading up to the statutory co-determination in the German Constitution of 1919. I don't know whether you know that co-determination was introduced to the Constitution in 1919 in Germany. Moreover, construction workers were to play an outstanding role in the German revolution with their initiative to socialize the construction industry. I'm going to talk about that in more detail. From an economic point of view, national industrial collective labour agreements regulated equal labour costs as a level playing field for competition between companies based on productive investment. In an international context, this form of competitive capitalism also came to supersede or transform colonial imperialism. I say this just in these general terms, it's a change of relationships between Germany and Britain, for instance, in that period. Germany was rising and Britain was declining economically. The political aspect of this new form of imperialism was certainly not a matter of dispute in the Great Lockup. However, in hindsight, it is all too evident that German industrial development and rising economic power substantially changed the international balance, in particular with the great colonial nations, first of all Britain and France, And the support in the declaration of war by the Social Democratic Party and the national labour unions in the Burgfrieden, it was called Burgfrieden, peace in the castle, may well be identified as an expression of the emerging social partnership between capital and labour. Partnership or employers and employees incorporated in the new framework agreement, terminating the great lockout in the construction industry. So, summarizing all these various aspects of social innovation at work in this outstanding industrial dispute, the German construction workers had made a pioneering step in the international development of statutory collective wage labour relations. I think this was really the pioneering step forward. Now, now to talk about the socialization of the construction industry, or the attempt to realize socializing the construction industry and housing development after 1918. Given the political constellation in 1918, the socialization of industrial assets was not a dominant program, but still an important option in the political debate. In particular in the labour movement and its unions. Therefore, at the first National Congress of the Construction Workers' Union on 6th of May 1990, the resolution of August Ellinger, he was the editor of the journal Grundstein, advocated the socialization of construction and housing development by building production cooperatives. And 5 months later, in October 1919, the first Bauhütte building, Soziale Baugesellschaft in Berlin, was founded under the initiative of the city planner Martin Wagner, and was to become the specimen of the Verband Sozialer Baubetriebe, Association of Social Construction Companies, which was set up according to a resolution passed by a majority at the Second National Congress of the Construction Workers Union, May 1920 in Karlsruhe. The Congress agreed to invest 5 million Reichsmark, that was a lot in those days, from its budget as start capital. And this Association of Social Construction Companies, I will call it VSB. This VSB was eventually founded in September 1920 under Martin Wagner as its chief executive, and August Ellinger, the editor of the Grundstein, as his deputy. At this time, the VSB was the National Association of 121 dominantly cooperative companies set up at local levels across the country, which grew in numbers up to 207 in 1922. So we are talking about a company which incorporated 207 cooperatives before, but then becoming departments in the corporation. The periodical Der Grundstein is testimony. This is really the wording astonishing to this stage of, or how the testimony to how the construction union and the workers saw what they were setting up. It must be our aim to achieve as soon as possible the socialization of the entire construction industry, including the construction materials industry, in order to liberate construction workers of all kinds from the fetters of wage slavery and the rest of workers and German people from exploitation through private capital. That was the program.
Grundstein was a union paper, yeah?
Grundstein is the union paper. Yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah,
To
please.
understand
Please,
the
disrupt
whole
me.
thing better. Two things actually. Did the German workers during this big lockout work in enterprises where lodging was given by the employers? So that when they were locked out, they had to leave the
No.
houses?
No,
That is one question.
No, construction workers were not usually in housing which belonged to the employers. That was something which existed in the mining industry, partly also in the engineering industry, but it was I've never heard of construction workers living in housing.
And second question related to this as well. How was the situation of buildings in Germany after the First World War?
Catastrophical.
All right. Okay.
Catastrophical. I come back to that. Yeah. Housing situation was terrible. Bauhütte, just a building guild. Bauhütte is the term which was a romantic term those days. It refers to the Bauhütte is the collective of workers in cathedral building. Bauhütte means shed for construction workers. The reality of the VSB umbrella company of subsidiaries under this old-fashioned name was fundamentally the opposite. A company with limited liability to its owners, such as labor unions, construction workers, local authorities, and other non-profit organizations, but mainly construction unions. The social component consisted of just 50% representation of workers on the board of the holding organization. A further step in the consolidation of the Association of Social Construction Companies, the VSB, was taken in November 1924, and following again a motion of August Ellinger, deputy of Martin Wagner now, and editor of the Grundstein. The board of the association decided to exclude or eliminate all cooperative Bauhütten that did not comply with the organization of the holding company, which means the capitalist structure was completed. The VSB thus turned into a national, genuinely capitalist conglomerate owned and directed by construction workers and their union organization. Workers were also offered VSB bonds. And Martin Wagner had achieved what he had advocated in 1919 under the title Socialization of Construction Companies. His wording was, I don't think his wording was, as in socialized construction companies, an opposition between employer and employee in the traditional sense does not exist anymore. The construction workers' union combines the function of the free labor union on the one hand and the employers' federation on the other. That was Martin Wagner's concept. To combine employer and employee in one corporation. And under these conditions, after the end of the economic crisis associated with the hyperinflation, which culminated in 1923, was the hyperinflation, money was virtually completely endemic. The Bauhütten of the Association of Social Construction Companies, after this inflation, gained an impressive share in the boom of the construction industry. From 1924 to 1929, that was the economic boom period, its annual average number of employees rose from 13,600 to 18,500. And its housing output up to 1929 reached 70,000 units. But with the Wall Street financial crash and the deep global economic depression beginning in 1930, this expansion came to a close. Its average number of employees dropped to 5,000 again, remember, from 18,000 to 5,000. And after this, and this was only the prelude to the annexation of the VSB by the Arbeitsfront, Labour Front, under the Nazi regime. So that was the end of the company. Complementary to the socialization of the construction industry, and perhaps even more urgent concern of the working class during the post-war period, the post-war depression, was housing provision, and hence the socialization of housing associations as customers of social construction companies and landlords on the social housing market. So, from a more general point of view, the relationship between social construction and housing companies is a matter of coordination between production and consumption. And under these auspices, the project of the DVOK, I won't tell you the exact name, it's very long. The DVOK is a housing company launched by the VSB and the Construction Workers Union, is only the organic extension, or was regarded as an organic extension of their social construction companies, part of the Bauhütten movement. And it was at the height of hyperinflation in 1923 that the Grundstadt advocated this project in these words. I've put that down. No, I haven't put it down. Why have I can, no. I read it out. If the social construction companies have not been able to take housing production completely out of the hands of private capital, this is due to the fact that an organized cooperative economic building development organization as a mediator between production and companies and those in need of housing has been lacking. That on the housing market, consumers did not have an organization exclusively representing the interests of the underprivileged classes of the population. So, under these auspices, they created a housing company, this housing company. And the housing policy was the core issue for construction workers. And as the financial requirements by far exceeded their resources, the National Congress of Construction Workers Union of 1922 decided to take it to the National Congress of the General German Union Federation. General German Union Federation was asked to provide capital for this project. The Union Congress, the General German Union Congress, passed a far-reaching resolution in favor of supporting an active cooperative economy. And soon after this Congress, the VSB started negotiating with about the money, and it was again Martin Wagner who took the initiative and developed a concept that led to the foundation of VAKFI. It was founded March 1924, a year after the end of the inflation. The shareholders of this housing company were labor unions. In the first place, the General German Union Federation, and further shareholders were. Put it down. I didn't. Let's forget it. So, a number of organizations. General Free Federation of Salaried Staff, German Federation of Civil Servants, Bank of Workers, Salaried Staff and Civil Servants, and of course the VSB. And later the People's Welfare Organization and a number of labour unions joined the ranks of shareholders, so it had a wide range of shareholders. As a central holding company based in Berlin, DEVOK, straight after its foundation, set up 70 regional branches throughout the country. The main financial resource for the housing development was the Bank of Workers, salaried staff and civil servants, which in turn held the accounts of labour unions. Thus, in the last resort, union membership contributions provided a major share of the credit for social house building of the DEVOK conglomerate and its subsidiary network. The famous Hufeisensiedlung, I show that to you. Is it visible? Designed by Bruno Taus. People who know about the architectural history of Germany know he was one of the great modern architects, especially in house building. By the way, the first office of the VSB was in the office of Bruno Taut. Anyway, this Hufeisensiedlung was built by Bauwitte. It became UNESCO World Heritage quite recently. There was only one of a large number of large estates epitomizing the internationally highly appreciated movement of modern architecture in Germany of the 1920s. And interestingly, whilst the VSB and its network of subsidiaries was completely transformed by the Nazi Deutsche Arbeitsfront, the Berlin branch of DEVOK, the housing company, second largest housing company in Germany, was extended to cover the whole of Germany and renamed Neue Heimat in 1939. It survived the war and was the largest social housing company after the Second World War and went bankrupt in 1980. Anyway, the impact of the Bauhütten movement, I wanted to conclude the Bauhütten story. And the being faced with the present astronomical social disparities, the question is what impact the companies of VSB and DEVOK had on the distribution of income in private property. Within this regime, wages and salaries were the only sources of income in property in the form of housing estates. And that was owned predominantly by bodies of labour organisations, cooperative companies and local governments. And therefore both income and private property were under the control of non-profit bodies. But the economy within which VSB and DEVOK had to subsist in competition was driven by the pursuit of profit and capital accumulation based on the exploitation of labour. Success in the short span of the boom between 1924 and 1929 does not tell us anything about the long-term prospects of these social experiments unless we identify Nazi dictatorship with capitalist usurpation of power. Anyway, the fate of August Ellinger is speaking testimony to the lack of resistance of the VSB. He took his life in 1933. So the labour movement before and after the revolution, to come to a conclusion. What can we learn? The German Revolution did not abolish capitalism, but it contributed to its transformation. We are looking here at two outstanding movements before and after 9th of November 1918, day of capitulation. Construction workers set a new standard in employer-employee relations in defeating the lockout and set up an island of production and consumption under the regime of labour organisation with a capitalist economy with VSB and CO. So, at the same time, after the revolution in Russia, given the tiny minority of Soviets in the still mostly agrarian economy, Lenin used the dictatorship of the proletariat to establish socialism under a highly centralized planned economy. This form of socialism eventually also imploded in 1989. But what has happened to capitalism in the last generation, especially after the 2008 crash of financial capital? Nobody expects the owners of this form of capital to determine the course of the economy with their investments. They extract dividends and interests from productive assets, whilst wage-earning managers bear the responsibility for productive investment. This is my interpretation of what is the dominant form nowadays in the economy. So at about the time of the lockout, economists were aware of the emerging break between ownership and management of production, which became the dominant transformation of capitalist relations in the course of the 20th century. Nowadays, labor, in all its disparate forms, determines the development of social relations of production. But the present global divisions of society, for instance, wage earners of different kind, the global divisions of society between labor and property, and according to income and wealth, I think are unsustainable. I expect that to explode soon, I hope, peacefully. This, the picture again, when I look at this period, I think the employer-employee relationship and the property-labor confrontation does not exist anymore. It's not practically in existence anymore. Thank you. That's, I hope I took too much time, didn't I?
It was good.
I should have.
Shall we give 2-3 minutes break so that everybody gets coffee, tea? Then we continue.
I can go to the toilet as well.
Yes. The toilet is included 4 minutes now. I have a few questions. Now, when I came to this country in 1983, there was something called housing associations. As far as I understood that time, housing associations would get very old buildings from the councils, do some basic work, and let poor people, people with very limited income, stay in the houses and be obliged to do some repairs as well. Now I am staying in a housing association which is capitalist. So that shows that the evolution of housing associations, even in this country, was completely to logical end. So I wouldn't expect anything else in Germany either. But my point is not that. My point is actually, I think, goes more theoretical problem in the socialist thinking. Having workers as stockholders, shareholders, they thought that they would be sort of making public everybody's company, socialized, socialist in a way. It reminds me Robert Owen in England, trying to create the best houses in such a way that people would live communistic life. He couldn't make here, so his followers migrated to America to create their own free communes, so to say. But it was about the building houses for the community, living together as it is example of that horseshoe-shaped building as well. But it continued everywhere. Having the public ownership was equalized to socialism in many ways. Today I think actually different. Socialism has maybe some relation to public ownership, but mostly about the workers' control, workers' management, which fascists in Germany have got rid of at one stroke, right? Arbeitsfront came, they expropriated everything overnight. The next day, the organization which was created by German socialists were a sheer fascist organization, Neue Heimat. So that actually should force us into thinking more in theoretical terms about socialism. What was it? Why did they do that? Why the construction workers have done that, but not the metal workers union? They couldn't confiscate or socialize the manufacturing production. This group, they couldn't do anything about it. Why? Or why the construction? Maybe the employers thought that, well, it would be good if German workers took all the costs and energy and they built their houses, which they could privatize later. There are many questions. It's a very interesting topic, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to add, I mean, I think there's a very similar, there's quite a parallel development in Britain from the 1890s, particularly in the construction industry, and with the strikes in the 1890s and then again in roughly the same period. I think the difference when you look at Britain was that the direct labour, there was the whole movement to build a direct labour movement, municipal socialism, in the 1890s. And so a lot of the London boroughs were, and the LCC of course, was building everything themselves. So it wasn't, they didn't take the form of the union actually saying, we're going to be the producers. The unions worked with the local authorities to produce. And that was repeated after the First World War. And there was far more people employed in direct labour organisations in the 1920s, up until the Tories closed them down at the end of the 20s, similar period, similar, exactly the same tax period, than there ever were in Melbourne. But I was going to say, I think the difference also in Britain was that this clause about piece rates. Now, from the 1890s in Britain, the construction industry was the only industry that was called a time-based industry. It was totally different from manufacturing and steel, and they were all piecework industries. But construction was famous right up until 1947 for the fact that wages were time-based. They had such big fights in the 1890s, as they did in Germany, against piecework. It was very successful. So there were, these differences are quite interesting in terms of the concept. If you read about the concept of social, in the building industry, about housing was very much associated in Britain with direct labour.
Yes, Nick.
I thought that was that's really interesting actually. This the way that the German construction unions got involved with building social housing, and it does. And the point you made that the German Revolution didn't overthrow German capitalism, but it did transform. It didn't, but it did transform it. I think that's the case. That's what the labour movements achieved all over Western Europe, even in the United States to quite a large extent actually, and throughout the world. So that's what we saw in the 20th century substantially, by the end of it anyway, that people ask about the revolutionary potential of the working class, but whatever it is going forward in the course of the 20th century, it did have, the working class had an enormous impact. It was the major political actor that served to transform things, and this is an example of that. And it's interesting what you say about the role the workers' movement sort of putting pressure on the local or national state to do things on their behalf, or in this case, doing things themselves. So it is be quite interesting to explore the balance between those two things. In Britain, of course, part of the labour movement still is the cooperative party, which is a small, which used to be a much more powerful thing in terms of not only in retail from whenever it was 1844 that the first cooperative shop was established, but going out into all kinds of fields, including funeral parlours and that kind of thing, which is a role that they still have. The concept, well, there was a consumer cooperatives, but that I think also serves to doesn't overthrow capitalism, obviously, but it can help improve the conditions of workers. I think just the final point, if you look at that photograph, is quite telling actually, because I don't think it's just what the labour movement is actually trying to achieve is not just a redistribution of income from capital to labour, if you like, or from the rich to the workers, although that's fundamental, and it's what Marx talks about, or what he's talking about, the distribution, the ratio between surplus value and wages. But it serves to actually, it's a transformation in the way things are, even within capitalism. The demands of the workers' movement are about transforming the way things are produced and the way their lives are led. So if you compare that to the kind of slums that were built before the First World War and have continued to be built in lots of places even since then, the density of housing and so on. It's not just a question. I mean, obviously, when you have the profit motive, they want a developer will want to make as much money as they can out of a bit of land, and they're going to be very loath to allow as much green space, for instance, as is evidently there. So, so housing developments throughout the 19th century tend to be much more concentrated, and that's the case now with the kind of rabbit hutches that go under the name of luxury housing developments in London. It's a conflict not only over the distribution of income, but between what you're left with if the profit motive is predominant and what happens if social considerations and human considerations come into it. And you see it more involved in local government right now than I have been through being in the Labour Party and so on. You see in the kind of conflicts, which are class conflicts over development issues and so on, which is over precisely this kind of thing, whether the profit motive is predominant or whether social needs are predominant. And that's not just a question of the distribution of income, it's a question of how you produce things, and arguments about what the most efficient way to do that. Because, for instance, well, I'm going back, you can take the health service, for instance. Workers could argue, could not be interested in how health services are delivered, and in the United States, quite often the trade unions aren't. What they're interested in is making sure the employer provides them with decent health insurance. But in Britain and among more progressive sectors of the labour movement in the United States. They are interested in how health services are organised and delivered because it's to do with the security of workers, because the way workers are disciplined, wage workers are disciplined is through the threat of unemployment. So if you're made unemployed, you're not going to have the money to purchase health or education or any of that. So one way of removing a degree of insecurity for the working class is for these services to be socially provided. But it's also about the efficiency with which things are provided and what the outcomes are. And self-evidently, even the NHS, in its rundown state, is a more efficient provider of health services than what you have in the United States. Just the ratio of health expenditure in Britain is something like half of what it is in the United States, but for most people, or at least for the poorest, achieves much better results and provides much greater levels of security. So just throw that into the mix.
Yours, and then?
Yeah, it's quite a very meticulous lecture or something like that. I'm just thinking about the state of the German state before the 1918 revolution. As I understand it, how much did the imperial competition within Europe contribute to the rise of socialism in Germany, and why weren't these international concerns transfer over to the colonies? Why didn't the socialist movement transform over to the colonies and transform over into the German colonies as well?
To some extent it did.
Should I immediately answer?
Yes, please.
And these are very, very difficult questions. Germany basically had no colonies. That was, the German colonies were very short. Didn't have a long time. Germany lost the colonies after the First World War. And I don't think there was a socialist movement of any sort in the German colonies. Nothing of that sort. But what you are addressing is a subject which I have been thinking about as well. And I put it also in my presentation. I think Germany was basically developing an economy which was not dependent on colonies. And that was the strength of the German economy. I think that the German economy, or let's say the German development of labour, was fundamentally different from Britain, for instance. In Germany, the universities started teaching natural sciences at the beginning, or the first third of the 19th century. And Germany became the country leading in chemistry, electricity, and manufacturing. These were the main sectors. Well, construction perhaps as well. Yes, construction as well, because Germany was leading in the development of concrete building. So and that was based on a situation where you couldn't exploit colonies. Germany didn't live on the exploitation of colonies. There were some people who went into the colonies and usurpated land, but the German was never dependent on imports from colonies, whereas Britain was dependent on it, and really it made a great impact in the economy. imperialist capitalism. Germany was not an imperialist capitalism. You mentioned that. And that is that's probably also the reason of the First World War. But I mean, that is too much. I definitely think that it was this controversy of a rising power and being faced with restrictions by the old colonial powers.
Any questions?
But there were other points that you have to make.
Yes.
No, there's more.
Okay.
Yes. In construction industry, the wages very much related with the non-outspoken part of it, which is like I don't know what you could call it in English. Is the part that is not paid taxation on it.
Ah, yeah.
Yes. And in that period of time, was there similar sort of things, or is it later on developed? Like illegal workers, let's say, or
Under the counter.
under the counter, or whatever we call it, because there's several aspects of it.
No, not under the counter. We are talking about direct and indirect wages.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Yeah, I've done a study about indirect wages after the Second World War in Germany.
Okay, so it wasn't before.
And by the end of the, no, exactly, this article which I read was published in 1989. Up to that point, those indirect wages which you can identify through wage components which are going into funds and so on, were already 50%. So 50% of the construction workers' wages were indirect. Only 50% were direct. The rest was indirect. If you add what the state provides through taxation, I didn't know, and it's not accounting it. In fact, we all live on more than 50%, I think, of services, social services and social insurance and so on, as compared to our direct wages. Before the First World War, I think it was minimal. I don't know how much they paid for pensions or no idea. Can't tell you, but I think it was very good compared to what we had experienced afterwards. I think this who said we experienced change of capitalism, and this change of capitalism in Germany started definitely. I mean, legal regulation of wages and social security started after the German Revolution or after the First World War. I think after the Second World War, the Nazis continued with that. And the Nazi regime, indirect social services and indirect wages rose enormously.
For the good of the discussion, could you tell us about this Bismarck period, which is background of the whole thing? What did he do? He must have done something about social welfare, social benefits, because it has had effects also in Scandinavia. When they are talking about social welfare state in Scandinavia, they talk about the Bismarck. They go back to Bismarck period in Germany. So that is one part of the question. And second part is that in order to build such buildings, there must be a very clear understanding of class against class, or us and them understanding, because this reflects we workers. We see each other, we don't want anybody else. And you find more or less the same sort of architecture in all over Scandinavia. You find huge housing estates. Inside the housing estates is a common communal area, which is not private property at all. Now, many places are privatized, but not the communal spaces. Whether you have private property or not, you have to act as part of community. So I just wonder, I don't know much about the German history, but class against class, us and them, must have contributed quite a lot for this Bauhütterbewegung.
I would like to say something about Bismarck. I don't know enough details, but I know two components of his policy which I regard as essential. He introduced the retirement pay. So I don't know whether he introduced also holiday pay or something like that, or pay during times of sickness. I just don't know. Anyway, he introduced a large component which was retirement pay. And the other point of Bismarck was he introduced general education for the whole population. Germany became the most educated country in Europe through the enforcement of general education. Free, of course. Never regard that as pay, but it's a very expensive social service. In the end. That's one side of Bismarck. Bismarck introduced social components related to wage-earning class, definitely. But on the other hand, he is also instrumental in the law against socialists, which lasted till 1989, from I think 1873 to 1889. Socialist Party and union organization were not permitted in Germany. So the development of unions started after the fall of the Sozialistengesetz, socialist law, or socialist act. I think Bismarck's reforms were enormously important. Education and a large proportion for sustenance of the working class.
Yeah, you and then Linda.
Yeah, I was interested in the union membership, where I think in the slide you said the bricklayers had the most membership, but the textile industry didn't. I mean, is it to do, what was the reason for why it was so low? Or were women a part of the workforce as well?
Come to difference in trade union organisation,
Yeah,
or
I mean,
labour organisation. I couldn't believe it when I saw the figures initially. It's a few years ago. I found it enormous, these differences. Especially textile industry surprised me because there was, I think in 1907, a huge textile industry strike in East Germany, Firmenschauer, which was also very successful. I think it was mainly women. But union organization, construction industry, apart from printing industry was already organized in the mid-century. It's very early. They were very, very highly organized. They were literate.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can only talk about Britain, but from the 1790s, the construction workers were the leading force throughout the 19th century. I mean, they're the ones who argued for the 8-hour day, you know, all the fights about time, all the construction history, 1860, 1890, go. So they were very, very dominant. I mean, there's a whole history of it. But I wasn't going to say that, but actually, this quote you have from, was it Grunstein in 1920s? I was last week in Rome with the construction union there under CGL. Now CGL has 5 million members, which is interesting. And they were arguing just the same, almost the same. Except the big difference was they're saying we must get rid of cement, we must no longer use cement for construction, and we must stop building for building's sake and doing all this speculative building, and then we must stop supporting all that. And it was really remarkable, just very similar. We have to democratise the whole industry. They've had enough.
What is CGL? What is CGL?
CGL is the, well, you know, they're divided politically, the union confederations in Italy, like in France, and CGL is the more communist, socialist union.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah.
Do they have any positive proposal?
Yeah.
Well, cement is one, to really, because of environmental, because it's so carbon intensive, it's a disastrous building material. So they're developing alternative building materials. Yeah, they also have a positive in terms of criticising the European Union for not giving enough say to workers. So that's really kind of, they're very directed at that at the moment as well. So it's quite interesting, because I think now it's a similar point of change, as Jon said, isn't it? I mean,
In different times, they follow each other. But
Yeah.
more or less everybody experiences more or less the same problems. But they do more or less the same mistakes all the time.
Hi, have you got the lock for the front door when you finish?
I will lock everything.
So I don't need to double lock?
No.
Okay.
Yes, please.
I would like to ask a question about wording, about the wording and terminology. This was about, there were some bullet points about the terms and conditions between the union. You know, there were bullet points, and there were two terminologies I would like to ask about you. Sorry, my ignorance, I just don't know those terminologies.
I didn't understand the question properly. My hearing is...
One of the slides, there are some bullet points that it's the terms of the contract between the union.
Collective agreement.
Agreement. If you
After
can,
the lockout.
yeah.
You had those bullet
Yeah.
points where you had what the workers gained and then the 3 points that the employers gained. She wants to ask questions about some of the words on that.
Ah,
So perhaps if you find that slide.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, this one. But from the top, the fifth one, agitation of workers, unions on construction sites to be allowed. What does it mean exactly in terms of agitation of workers? What does it mean this stuff?
The sentence conversely, 3 of the points, refers to the 3 points below. It's not a point of view.
No, the agitation of workers' unions on
Oh, yeah,
construction
that
sites.
means they were not allowed to recruit membership on the construction site.
After this
But they
agreement,
were
they
allowed.
So
were.
they were not allowed to come to a construction site and recruit members.
Okay.
So after
But
this agreement,
very
that changed.
simplified. But whatever you regard as agitation on the site it's open to question, but
Okay. So I guess workers.
the main point is they were not allowed to do anything in favor of union organization on the site.
Okay. So what about the workers' sympathy campaigning become forbidden? What workers' sympathy campaign? So does it mean anything to attract sympathy for
What
workers?
does that mean?
I said,
Supporting each other.
So does it mean supporting strikes?
if there's a strike next door, then you go also on strike with the striking workers in another company. So you
So
have no
supported
reason
strikes.
in your company, but you support workers in another company.
Okay.
It's not an English term, but simply
The sympathy action. But it's also illegal here now.
It's illegal now,
Yes.
yeah. Since the 80s it's been illegal here.
yeah.
It is.
In Turkey it's illegal.
It's now illegal.
And there was a third thing you wanted to ask about?
The piecework attracted my attention.
Yeah.
90 years ago, it's very serious case, because when we are trying to unionize the textile workers in 90s, 95, and piecework is sort of exploitation without the workers without realizing it. They start very early to finish more piecework to get extra and longer hours. And the workers working with non-piecework.
Yeah.
There is a big argument.
Time breaks.
Yes, fights, everything you see. I was chair of the textile branch. Many times we witnessed or we tried to, we had to involve to separate them. And also, people, for example, Bengali people working hourly rates, and Turkish people, and Turkish and Kurdish people working piecework, and there's a division between them. You cannot organize them, you cannot bring them together. And 90 years ago it was the case, and 95 we suffered too much when we tried to organize the workers in the union.
It wasn't a particular controversy, I remember, in Hamburg. It was a controversy, of course, between the workers. There were piece workers who felt strong enough to earn more money,
Yeah.
and others who couldn't compete with them and were therefore, or who didn't want to compete either. Anyway, there was always a controversy within the workers, among the workers. Always. But for a union, piecework is detrimental at any rate, because it's a competition between workers, or it implies competition between workers.
Yeah.
So the union wanted piecework to be abolished, and there was also a large part of the construction workers who also wanted it to be abolished and to be incorporated more or less in the wage rate which everybody benefits from.
Yeah.
Now, but you're perfectly right. It was a division amongst the workers. In Hamburg, there was a large fraction of workers who wanted piece rates to be maintained.
Can I give some extra information relating to this Martin Wagner, who is the founder of VBS?
Yeah, VBS.
Yeah,
VSB.
VSB.
Verein Sozialer Baubetriebe.
When the German Nazis tried to overtake all these companies and get rid of all socialists, Martin and his comrades have been dismissed from their jobs. What happened was that Martin Wagner emigrated to Turkey in 1935. Now, when he came to Turkey, he was so famous and so esteemed that he became Turkish government's advisor on architectural matters.
planet.
And many German emigres from Germany under fascism came to Turkey, and they established universities, technical universities. They wrote lots of mathematics books, physics books, lots of things in Turkish. They learned Turkish, so he became very famous architect in Turkey, Martin Wagner. And then he migrated to Harvard, United States, and he became a professor of city planning in United States. And he died in 1957 in America. But until that time, he has contributed a lot in Turkey. Today I mentioned some of my friends in Turkey who work in the architectural chamber. Oh, they know Martin Wagner, they said. Oh yeah, we know. We know also Bruno Taut, his colleague who has done a lot of things in the area of architecture as well. So this part of history may be not known very well, but he is famous. I did found today. Very interesting.
Got one more.
Yes, please.
I actually wanted to ask you, I've heard vaguely about the housing developments in Vienna in a similar period to this, which are well known and spoken about. I've not heard about this before actually. I'm not sure what basis they would have. Were they the local authorities building them, or was it with the trade unions involved in the same way as in Germany?
In Vienna, was
Red Vienna.
Vienna was the town.
Yeah.
Predominantly, all the big estates were under the town ownership. In Germany, there was a number of companies like DEVOC, non-profit companies for social house building after the revolution. I wanted to say something again about revolution. Revolution is often regarded as the instrumental in changing the social relations. I see revolutions rather as a symptom of change, I must say. Think of the French Revolution. It took 40 years till it had an impact in France. It was followed by a counter-revolution, then Napoleon and so on. So it had a very long-term effect. If you said, well, we always say that was because of the revolution. But before the revolution, there was also already a process of change. And I see the revolution rather as one particular step in transition, which goes over a long period. So we are talking here, or I have at least tried also to show that we had a transition under the Soviet regime and under the capitalist regime, and at one point they came together again, and now we have. It's not in the same, under the same regime, but they're very close nowadays. I think the development in Russia and the development in the former Soviet states, many of the former Soviet states are now part of the European Union. Russia is in a process of development which is not so different from the process of development in the United States. And we are observing the process of globalization at the moment as well.
Any more questions? We have 3 more minutes. Contributions, anything? Well,
I have a contribution.
please.
Thank you very much for giving me a chance to talk about this.
We enjoyed that.
Thank you for enlightening us about the part that is in the